After shooting the lateral hump video, I realized that I wanted to give you sort of an overview of all the parts of the head that we transplant with hair and how I conceptualize it. I just finished writing a book with Amina, my hair transplant coordinator, that's coming out hopefully in the next year or two. And this is an original idea I came up with after sort of looking at the whole 360 on how I transplant hair and how I want you to conceptualize how hair is different using a box. So we're going to actually think not outside the box, but think on the box. So we're going to do a little close-up video of the parts of this box to have you better understand it. Okay, we have a close-up of this box, and what we're going to talk about is vertical versus horizontal planes. The vertical front plane is the forehead. I think that's pretty obvious. You don't want to put hair grafts here, otherwise it looks weird. The hairline is defined as a transition from the forehead over to the horizontal plane. Remember, our heads are round. They're not square. At least not most of our heads, I guess. But the idea is that when this slowly vertically transitions right over here, if we take an intersection point, that transition point is what defines the anterior hairline as the lowest acceptable anterior hairline. That's why some of these transplants I've seen where the hair is transplanted to the forehead, it looks weird, or if it's transplanted way back here, there's no proper frame to the face. So that's a good way to think about transition from the anterior vertical plane over to the horizontal plane, which defines the hairline. The mid-scalp is just basically this area here that just defines the central area. And we talked about in another video of the lateral crease, which is the lateral border, the outer border between central hairs that go forward versus what's going to happen on the sides. And on each side is what's called the lateral hump. And the lateral hump basically is almost like a waterfall effect, where the hair that's designed and angled should go forward here and cascade down like this. So that transition from lateral crease, almost like falling off the edge here, it begins to fall this way. So if you design a lateral hump going this way, it looks fake. If you go this way, it looks fake. It should look like a transition going downward. And so how do you define the lateral hump? Well, basically where the outer eye defines this area, but it's basically where the vertical meets the horizontal going downward, so you can define that differentiation. I think too many times when we look at a hair transplant, we just see this mess of hair, and you need to understand each of the components have a different angle and growth of hair, otherwise you don't get a natural result. The anterior temple is basically the outer frame of the face. Remember, when we look at the person's forehead or face with the eye sitting right here, this is the frame to the face that creates a much more attractive face when this is bordered by hair, not just this one. These are, in my opinion, not equally important, but pretty close to being very, very important in terms of the framework, which is the anterior temple. So the lateral hump and the other side, the lateral hump with the anterior temple border is the same thing, with the lateral crease being transitioning over. Let's talk about the back of the head, the crown. The crown, also known as a vertex, is a spiral pattern that sits on the upper back portion of the vertical plane. Well, what is it, the transition from crown over to the central scalp? That transition point, we call it the vertex transition point. Remember, the crown can also be known as the vertex. It's a similar or same, depends on which textbook you read, but for all intents and purposes, let's consider the vertex and the crown the same. I do use those two terms interchangeably. So a vertex transition point is almost like a posterior hairline, if you will. It's a transition from the back hairline, or sorry, the horizontal plane to the vertical plane on the back side, just like the hairline is for the front side. So that transition point is important to understand that there's a reason to define this border, because if we do a hair transplant where we sort of stop arbitrarily somewhere over here, it won't look right because our brain will see something wrong. And the reason we're seeing something wrong is that the transition point from a horizontal scalp over to a vertical scalp is actually a completely different subregion of the head, and you must define crown hair on the vertical plane on the back side. When you're transitioning for the vertex transition point, even this subunit of the head is defined differently. When we create them, they're actually hairs that angle out like this, whereas the hairs in the front hairline almost all go forward in the male, with a little bit of just a little transition at the lateral 1 centimeter right here, with almost all the hairline going forward. The vertex transition point is different. There's actually a fanning effect that occurs right here, and the reason, if you think about it, is there's a fanning effect on the crown. So whenever we go from one subregion to the next subregion, the transition points must reflect a gradual shift in angle to the new position. Because what happens with the vertex transition point is the fanning begins to become closed in and go forward. Now, the other reason why there's fanning is, think about it this way, because the head is round, when you transition from the crown forward, remember this side here goes so that it begins to fall this way. So the angles of the crown go up and arch over, but they're going in a fan direction at the vertex transition point, but as it wraps around to the lateral hump, it's also going forward and then going down this way. I hope you can see that transition point. So understanding the head like a box will help you understand that each individual subregion is defined by certain borders, by understanding vertical and horizontal planes of the scalp, so that each subregion of the head can be transplanted correctly, both in the angle, the direction, and the orientation of each of the hair grafts, obviously as well as the size. And that's very, very important. Hopefully that brief description that's going to be featured in my new textbook coming out in about a year by Elsevier, called Aging Face New Paradigm, will actually present this information. This is an original idea I came up with.